Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it sounds to me like they're not only working on, groundbreaking things, but they're also, helping to bolster the industry as a whole, by creating these additional companies, and spinning them out. So that, I mean, that's a great, great attribute as well.
Very much so. So it's been terrific to be a part of all this.
Yeah, absolutely. So you're also an author, and tell me a little bit about what you write about, and what are some of the things that you're looking to aim to address.
So the last few years at Pfizer, the reputation of the industry was getting battered, and there was a lot of, I thought, misinformation out there. And so the first thing I did when I left Pfizer, literally in the first year, was to write a book called Drug Truths, dispelling the bad image of pharmaceutical R&D. And what was rewarding about that was I wrote about all sorts of things. The industry is. I'll give one example. People say, "Well, the industry is only interested in Me Too drugs. They don't do anything original," which wasn't true. And each chapter I addressed one of these things, but then I would tell the story of a drug that showed the innovation of the industry. So with that one, nothing original. I talked about an AIDS drug that we came up with at Pfizer called Cellcentury, which is a pretty important AIDS drug at the time. But I also talked about a Me Too drug is such a misnomer. So, you and I, Don, look so somewhat alike. I mean, white middle-aged males or whatever. But I can guarantee you that there are drugs that I can take with no problem that may have an adverse effect on you, and that's true for any drug. Every drug has side effects, and a drug like Lipitor, which is now in a generic form, is the third most prescribed drug in the United States as a torvastatin. I know people who take it and get headaches or get GI distress or whatever. So you need to have multiple agents in the category, even though you might have one successful one. There are other compounds. That compound might not work for other people. So that's one reason. Second reason for having other alternatives is pricing. If you have multiple agents in a certain therapeutic class, the price will always come down because insurance companies will bid you down to say, well, if you want this on our formulary, you've got to come down in price. So that kind of research is very important. And the other thing is, nobody sets out to come up with a Me Too drug after the fact. So it's sort of like you don't sit around and say, well, Merck just had this great compound. Why don't we get ourselves one? Because Merck is selling $1 billion a year with it. Well, if you start a program that late, you'll never. By the time you get on the market, there'll be generic entries, so it won't be successful at all. What happens normally is that people will start programs. We read the same literature, we go to the same scientific meetings. Ideas will foment and grow into programs, and some people are more successful more rapidly, and others are not. So anyway, Drug Truths was set out to do that. Now, that got me a lot of places to give lectures and to talk about this. And invariably, now what will happen is people will say to me, knew that. I never heard that. So that was rewarding, but it's sort of not big audiences. So then I got an invitation, however, to be on the Dr. Oz show. And I got to go on to talk about the drug industry. And there was a person who was a person who tends to attack and write negative things about the industry named Dr. John Abramson. He was on the panel. It was he and I and Dr. Oz. And I was too naive to ask what the segment was going to be called. And I walked onto the stage, and there was a big sign saying, "Four secrets drug companies don't want you to know."
Oh,
And that was quite the experience. But I got to see, and the audience was also somewhat loaded negatively, so that at one point, Dr. Oz stood in front of a group of 30 people and said, "Wow, how many of you have ever experienced drug side effects?" And they all stood up,
of
everyone.
course. Yeah, of course.
Like, oh, you got to be kidding. But that led me to write my second book, Devalued and Distrusted: Can the Pharmaceutical Industry Restore Its Broken Image? And then I also at the time was writing. I had a blog, and it was picked up by Forbes.com, so I wrote there. And then, as in the last 6 or 7 years, the negativism toward the industry has focused more on drug pricing.
Mm.
And so that led me to write Pharma and Profits, Balancing Innovation, Medicine, and Drug Prices. Because, and that's actually one of my major concerns still, the pressure on drug pricing. And unfortunately, people don't necessarily understand all the issues involved in drug pricing. And you can only, if you only hear the negative stuff, if you only hear Bernie Sanders taking people to Canada to get their insulin, people say this is a disaster and needs to be corrected. And by the way, the Inflation Reduction Act put a cap on insulin prices for everybody at $35, which is wonderful. And I think it's great. Having said that, before the IRA, 75% of the people in this country were already paying less than $35 for their insulin because they had decent insurance, and it was naturally covered. People also don't realize that you can go, and I didn't believe this when I first heard it. You can go to Walmart and without a prescription buy insulin for $24.88 a vial.
Mm.
And you're looking at me like I'm crazy, but it turns out that's true. And so, but you can't. First of all, it's not the very good insulin that is now sold. I'm going a little too much on insulin, but I'll say the insulin is not insulin. I'm sounding like Rudy Giuliani. Truth isn't truth. Insulin that was discovered in the 20s and 30s is insulin that was isolated from animals. The so-called insulin now are modified insulins that the drug companies, and you need a prescription to get these, drug companies have gone in and made modifications to improve our nation. It's much better than regular insulin, safer to take, et cetera. So people shouldn't go to Walmart to get their insulin unless they're under doctor's prescription, doctor's care, because if you misdose, misinject your insulin, you can have all sorts of problems. But in any case, all sorts of things like this are out there, and as a result, there's tremendous pressure on the industry and pricing, and you know it's a bipartisan issue. Both Democrats and Republicans will say we've got to rein these drug companies in and get these ridiculous high prices down. And I thought this would all change after the pandemic. That the only industry that could have saved us from the pandemic is the biopharmaceutical industry, with companies like Pfizer and Moderna. But not only them, dozens of companies, if not 100 companies, were all looking at ways to treat COVID as a top priority. And some things worked, like things like Paxlovid and antibodies like Regeneron did. So some things came out very well, but the whole industry did. And there's no other, you couldn't do that in academic institutions. You couldn't do that at the NIH. Only the industry did that. And for a while, I'd say 9 months to a year, Gallup polls and other polls show dramatic improvement in how the industry was viewed by people. Some of the highest numbers I've ever seen. And now it's eroded back down and it's coming back down. So why do I write? I try and give talks. And why do I have the pleasure of speaking to people like you? Is basically to try and teach what the industry does, what's important, and how it's a necessary part of our whole health ecosystem.
Yeah, I feel like it's a little duplicitous to say that, hey, drug prices are too high, and then we have, our regulators and the people that are politicians with their hand in their pocket, to reaching deeply into the coffers of the drug prices themselves. And so I think it's a little disingenuous just to keep saying that, hey, look, the drug prices are too high, and then you accept $100,000 to $300,000 of money from everybody from pharmaceutical warehousing all the way through to the each of the lobbyists that are essentially involved in drug development as well. And so I sort of, I agree with you. I think it's something that the public is just not aware of, all of the different hands that touch a drug, as it goes through. But also, I kind of look at the other side of this, which is, look, it takes decades to research and then bring a drug to market, back to your original point. And I really think that, it's one of those things that you have to work through. So yeah, it looks like we actually just lost John. Hopefully he'll join us back here in just a second. But yeah, I do think that it's one of those things that unfortunately, we struggle with.